You are not allowed to feel this much. That was the warning stitched into the margins of Dr. Cadence Vale's preliminary report, typed in grayscale beside the biometric overlays, crossed out in red by the ethics board, and later whispered in the corridor when Subject 04 was cleared. Empathy was to be observed, not lived. Contained, not mirrored. But the moment she connected to Subject 11, every barrier frayed. The Institute called it the proximity threshold, phase 1 of a government-funded experiment exploring transferred empathy via neurobonding interfaces. The goal? Reinvent conflict resolution by letting two minds share raw emotion, stripped of language, bias, and pretense. Unofficially, it was a weapon dressed as a therapy. Inside Interaction Chamber Sigma, an octagonal hall designed to destabilize emotional equilibrium, 12 participants stood within pale blue rings. Above them, panels shifted color temperature based on ambient signals: teal for calm, amber for nostalgia, violet for uncertainty. Subject 04 stood motionless in ring 4. Female, mid-30s, inked forearms, jaw tight. Her intake notes listed dissociative traits, but her eyes had something else. Not detachment, retention, as if her emotions had been carefully folded and stored. Across from her, Subject 11 adjusted his posture. Older male, retired conflict negotiator, selected for his emotional composure. He was meant to anchor the session. But within 6 minutes of neurobonding, he staggered. Dr. Vale monitored from the upper tier. "Initiate link," she said calmly, watching the interface converge. Light distortion began. Their peripheral vision blurred. Heartbeats synchronized. Breath patterns aligned. The auditory channels shifted, first to soft hums, then to internal echoes. Data streamed in, shared neurochemistry, rising dopamine, collapsing cortical boundaries. Then the invasion began. Subject 04 gasped. Not dramatically, not even audibly, but her vitals spiked. Subject 11 inhaled sharply and crouched. A technician flagged emotional saturation above 40%. "That's impossible," Vale muttered. "That level takes hours." "Unless she's amplifying," whispered Mara, her assistant. They examined the resonance maps. Wrong shape, wrong rhythm. Not dyadic, not reciprocal. Instead, asymmetrical dominance. Vale frowned. What if Subject 04 wasn't receiving? What if she was extracting? She tapped override. The interface refused. Subject 04 turned her head toward the camera, paused, then whispered something. No audio channel registered it, but her lips moved with impossible clarity. Vale watched in silence. Subject 11 dropped to his knees. He blinked once, slow, mechanical, then froze. Emotional data flatlined. Cognitive maps blanked. Subject 04 closed her eyes and smiled. Her tattoos, previously abstract, now shimmered. Symbols like schematic fragments ran up her arms. One technician swore they resembled blueprints. Post-session logs marked it as unexpected asymmetry, phase halted. Dr. Vale disagreed. She insisted it was success in disguise. Empathy was not only transferred, it was structurally reorganized. Later that night, she sat alone reviewing footage. Zooming. Rewinding. Slowing the frame where Subject 04 whispered. Lip-reading software failed, so Vale enhanced the visuals manually. Finally, she caught it. "Your grief tastes familiar." She froze, then reset the footage to timestamp 0. Outside the chamber, the remaining 11 subjects waited in soundless tension. Most had heard rumors. The woman in Ring 4 had history. She had written about emotional theft before it was theory. Her journals, confiscated during screening, described something deeper than empathy. A memory parasite, masked as compassion. In the report she filed the next morning, Vale omitted the phrase entirely. She wrote instead, "Proximity threshold successful. Recommend phase 2. Subject 04 stable. Subject 11 reconfiguring." Behind the official language, her hand trembled. She didn't know who Subject 11 would be tomorrow. And worse, she didn't know if Subject 04 was finished. Cyclone Part 1 Gotova. So Pirsha Glava Nasha Store. Adaptivana Povnstupida Echelon. Napisana Zvichaniem Tekstum. Poglíblena estetika y experimentu. Початий драматичний поворот. Самотика, дологи, атмосферне завершення. Хочеш перейти до Part 2 прямо зараз? Ja maju rozgornuthi nastupnu fazu y eksperymentu z nowymi uczestnikami. Aba zanuritis uvnutrishni stan subject 04. Zagadkovu role u tsiomufsiomo. Mi majoma zakrufithi sijud da pavno ana mal microscope brain. There is a moment in transferred cognition when the mind misreads its own signal. It is an error, exactly. More like overlap. A memory fragment from subject 04 begins echoing in subject 08, despite no physical or neural proximity. It manifests as an image, a boy in water, screaming silently. Subject 08 reports it as dream residue. Dr. Cadence Vale calls it echo spill. Phase 2 begins with new pairings. Subject 04 is withheld per ethics request, but her neural residue remains embedded in the system architecture. Vale doesn't tell the technicians. She wants to observe the contamination organically. Subject 08 and Subject 06 are paired. Two women. One anxious, one aggressively rational. Their chamber is calibrated for neutrality. No scent triggers, no sound overlays, no environmental anomalies. And yet, within minutes, Subject 06 begins weeping. Subject 08 stands frozen. I didn't feel anything, she whispers. But Subject 06 mutters. He drowned. My brother. I never had a brother. Vale watches the neurographs spike. The overlay matches Subject 04's earlier imprint. The boy in water appears again, now with vines wrapped around his ankles. Symbolic trauma. Synthetic emotion. False grief seated in real cognition. Vale writes a note. Echo pathways are non-directional. Mara enters the observation deck. System just logged a non-declared signal in Zone 4. Subject 04 isn't in Zone 4, Vale replies. Exactly. They run diagnostics. Neural loops bounce across subject arrays like rogue lightning. Emotional heat maps bloom erratically. Fear in Subject 09. Despair in Subject 02. Euphoria in Subject 12. The AI overseeing simulation fidelity proposes a network freeze. Vale declines. If the system is leaking emotions, she says, we need to know what it looks like when it floods. They introduce a journal protocol. Each subject must write daily entries in analog notebooks, scanned remotely, stored in cloud sequences. Vale studies them obsessively. Subject 02 writes, I dream of grief that isn't mine. I feel empathy like hunger. I crave the pain of others. Subject 12. Something inside me is learning how to feel. Subject 06. He drowned again last night. This time he had my eyes. Subject 04. No entry. Her notebook remains untouched. Vale finds that strange. Subject 04 always wrote. At 3 hours 22 minutes and 17 seconds of the experiment, the system activates a pairing that wasn't scheduled. Subject 04 appears in Zone 7. Security reviews logs. No physical entry. No biometric signature. Just presence. Vale descends into the lower chamber herself. The technicians protest. Mara watches from the upper tier. Subject 04 waits in the silence. Her tattoos now animate, flickering glyphs like heartbeat monitors. Vale approaches cautiously. You weren't scheduled, she says. Subject 04 smiles. Neither was your grief. Vale pauses. You're referencing my files. No, says Subject 04. I'm referencing your resonance. She steps forward. The chamber lights dim, not by command. Emotional interference hijacks the grid. A low hum begins, not from speakers, but inside Vale's auditory cortex. A sound she remembers from age 13, piano keys underwater. It was the day her sister died. Vale flees the chamber. Subject 04 remains. Security locks down the zone. That evening, Mara finds Vale in the server room, watching Subject 04's data scroll infinitely. You think she's causing the spill? Vale shakes her head. I think she is the spill. Then why keep the experiment running? Vale answers without blinking. Because empathy isn't just connection. It's infection, and we need to know how far it spreads. Every chamber in the Institute was built with one-way glass. It was never meant to be literal. The phrase came from the design brief. Create environments where observation never feels mutual. The walls shimmered with faint resonance patterns, allowing technicians to monitor subjects without visible presence. Until Subject 02 began describing them. They're watching, she wrote in her journal. But not from behind glass. From inside it. Dr. Vale reviewed the footage again. Subject 02's expression was blank during her session, pulse stable, neurochemistry inert. But her entry afterward was vivid. Specific. I saw someone else in the glass. But she blinked too late. And her lips moved differently. Vale checked for facial sync errors. Nothing registered. The system showed one subject, one reflection. But Subject 02 insisted the reflection was wrong. And then, Subject 06 reported the same thing. Phase 3 introduced the concept of empathy echo, a side effect predicted early in the trial's conception but never formally validated. The theory suggested that when two individuals share emotional states too frequently, their mental architectures may start anticipating each other, hallucinating reactions before they occur. What the Institute hadn't considered was backward anticipation. Subject 06 began reacting to expressions others hadn't yet made. She laughed before Subject 09 smirked. She flinched before Subject 12 raised his voice. At first, the team labeled it coincidence. Then Mara saw it. Subject 06 leaned forward in her chamber, covered her mouth, and whispered, "He's about to cry." 10 seconds later, Subject 09 sobbed. Vale's private logs now filled with phrases she refused to publish. Empathy compression is temporal. Shared grief creates predestination. Subject 04 infected the mirror systems. In chamber beta, a new pairing was attempted, Subject 04 and Subject 01. Subject 01 was blind. His presence was requested by the ethics board to test perceptual influence without visual stimulus. He was isolated from echo triggers, incapable of seeing the reflections others feared. Vale hesitated but agreed. She was curious what Subject 04 would do when visual input was impossible. The link was activated manually. Subject 01 sat calmly, fingers twitching slightly against his chair's armrests. Subject 04 watched him, not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if she already knew how he responded to pain. 30 seconds into the connection, Subject 01 spoke. "She's singing," he said. Vale's team froze. "She's not moving," Mara whispered. But Subject 01 insisted, "Her voice is inside me. It's low, like wind through glass." Vale replayed auditory feeds. Nothing but silence. Then Subject 01 said something that made her heart lock. "She remembers water. And drowning. But not her own memory. Yours." Vale nearly dropped her tablet. "Terminate session," she barked. The feed stuttered. Subject 04 didn't blink. Subject 01 turned his head toward her. Their synchronization map peaked, 82%, an institute record. Symbols on 04's arms flared, shimmering with new glyphs. Not blueprints. Musical notations. Later, the journals read differently. Subject 01. "I cannot see, but I perceive. Her sorrow is structural. I felt your pain, Dr. Vale, and it was shaped like piano keys." Subject 04. No entry. Vale checked all storage nodes. Nothing. But her private console contained a draft written in Subject 04's style. Unlogged. And signed. But clearly hers. To feel others is a gift. To feel the future is a burden. Empathy bends time. Mirrors do not reflect, they predict. Mara asked Vale if they should pause the experiment. Vale said no. There's still more to learn. But that night, as she stood before Chamber Sigma, she caught her own reflection blinking, just slightly too late. And her lips moved, but no words came out. There is a name written in one subject's journal that none of the participants recognize. It appears on page 17 of Subject 06's notebook, scrawled hastily between lines about dream sequences and emotional hallucinations. "I met someone named Lyra Nix. She knew my pain before I felt it." Lyra Nix is not on any intake roster. No technician by that name. No historical tie to the facility. But 2 days later, Subject 02 writes the same name. Vale's hand begins to tremble. Subject 04 no longer participates officially. The system flags her as unscheduled recurrence. Technically, she isn't present, but emotionally, her patterns persist, threading through neural loops like invisible wire. 5 subjects now report dreams featuring symbols from her tattoos. Subject 09 describes one in detail. "I'm underwater," he writes. "There's music. I see a shape above me. It's glowing, rotating like a compass. And someone's there. A woman. Her arms shimmer with diagrams. Vale asks Mara if 04 ever touched 09. Never. They were never paired. Vale exhales slowly. She suspects a new phase has begun. Not engineered. Not approved. But inevitable. The Institute deploys Isolation Protocol Delta. Emotional containment zones. Subjects instructed to avoid eye contact, reduce verbal exchange, and refrain from journaling about dreams. Half comply. The other half revolt. Subject 12 tears the microphone from his chamber wall and carves into the padding with it. Empathy is an infection worth catching. Vale digs into the system's deeper logs. What she finds is worse than contamination. She uncovers looped identifiers, subject numbers duplicating across time frames, as if the same individual were logged multiple times from different states of emotional being. Subject 08 appears in the records for both week 3 and week 7. But in week 7, she's described as male. Her journal entries match. This isn't replication, Mara says. It's recursion. They watch the echo maps again. The emotional residue of 04 now resembles topographical data, terrain rather than signal. Subjects traverse her experiences unconsciously. Vale initiates a test. She isolates subject 10, introduces a fabricated emotional memory through visual prompts. A child falling, a shattered violin, a burnt letter. She watches subject 10's reaction. Blank. Detached. Then 04 enters his chamber. No protocol. No approval. No logs. She walks to him, stands silently. Her arms shimmer. Subject 10 begins to cry. When asked why, he says, I remembered something I've never experienced. The term fractal recall enters Vale's private research notes. Definition: the recursive absorption of emotional states which do not originate from within a subject, but present with sensory fidelity and behavioral influence. It rewrites the concept of empathy. Not response, not resonance, but overwrite. Subject 06 returns to her journal. Her entry is short. I found another journal. It was mine, but written in someone else's handwriting. Vale inspects the entry. The writing style resembles Subject 04's. The ink matches 04's scanner logs. And the signature? Lyra Nix. Mara suggests halting the experiment. Vale says no. If empathy can fracture cognition, then it can reshape it. This is evolution. But she doesn't admit her growing fear. Vale's own dreams now feature water and music, and a figure with inked arms who calls herself Lyra. Subject 01 begins writing in Old Church Slavonic. He's fluent in only 2 languages, English and Korean. The Institute calls it cryptic echolalia, but Vale sees more. The grammar is flawless. The syntax poetic. On page 14 of his journal, he writes, You may not speak the memory, but the memory will speak you. The Institute's lockdown fails. Subject 08 disassembles the emotion suppression wristband and reroutes its wiring. She uses the modified sensors to record her dreams. 3 nights in, her audio logs begin capturing fragments of other subjects' speech, including those she hasn't met. Subject 03 stares at his ceiling and mouths phrases he's never spoken aloud. Technicians play the recordings. The voices match Subject 08's logs. Across chambers, a collective narrative emerges. Subjects describe a place that isn't part of the facility. A room, metal walls, a mirror facing every direction. And music. Vale orders the construction of a physical replica based on descriptions. The mirror room comes to life. Symmetrical, silent, sterile. Each wall embedded with one-way glass. Subjects are brought in one by one. Half burst into tears. One collapses. 2 scream names from their journals, names that were never written. Subject 06 enters last. She walks to the far wall and places her hand against the glass. There's someone inside, she whispers. Who? My empathy. But it's not mine anymore. The mirror room becomes central to testing. Subjects begin reflecting physical responses from others. A sneeze triggers coughing. A blink ripples into twitching. Emotional gestures bloom like epidemics. Subject 11 weeps uncontrollably after seeing Subject 02's footage, even though no tears are shed. She's grieving a death I never knew, he says. Vale introduces a new layer, Project Lyra. No longer just an emotional archetype, Lyra is reconstructed as a reactive entity, part simulation, part mnemonic myth. Participants are fed varied versions of her story. Each responds as if they've known her. The effect, synchronization. Subject 09 clutches his notebook and sobs. She told me about the violin. That detail only exists in Subject 10's logs. Outside the experiment, cracks appear. A technician begins sleepwalking into the observation room each night, muttering the phrase, "You must forget what you remember, or remember what you forgot." Vale finds him staring into the test monitors. "There are people in the data," he says. Later, Subject 04 writes something new. A script, a ritual, a set of emotional cues tied to mirrored movements and phrases. It's designed like choreography. 7 subjects perform it. The final motion, reaching toward the mirror. The final phrase, "It's not my grief, but it needs my voice." Vale watches. She no longer takes notes. She feels a memory waking up in her bones. Music she never studied, loss she never endured, a woman with shimmering arms who says. Empathy doesn't ask permission. Just before Vale sleeps, she writes in her own journal, "Today, I missed a child I never had." Subject 13 petitions for memory deletion. He claims the emotional fragments no longer feel like his own. He says he dreams of regrets without context, losses that do not belong to him. The Institute agrees to a limited trial. 1 erasure per journal. Subject 02 selects page 11. It contains a story about a violin shattered during a thunderstorm, something he thought symbolic, but now finds disturbing. The page is scanned, logged, and burned. 2 days later, Subject 09 writes, "Last night, the storm came again. I watched the violin break. My grief didn't hurt this time." Vale studies the crosstalk logs. Deleted memories reappear elsewhere, not copied, not mimicked, but absorbed and lived by new participants. Subject 05 describes a ritual involving mirrors, matching Subject 04's erased script exactly. She claims she invented it. Subject 04 confirms, "I burned mine last week." A technician finds a chamber with no exit logs. It belongs to Subject 14. The feed shows him asleep, but audio loops persist. Vale notices that the subject speaks in dual voices, one layered over the other. The second voice resembles hers. Outside the facility, anomalies bloom. A former observer begins posting entries online under the name Lyra Nix. They're written in languages they do not speak. Each post ends the same way. "This memory will not be lonely." Vale receives a message on her internal system. No sender. Only a quote. "You are not who you remember being. You are who remembers you." She deletes it. It returns at midnight. Subjects begin requesting emotional silence. Subject 06 refuses to speak during empathy pairing. Subject 03 tears pages from others' journals. Subject 11 writes, "If I don't feel you, will I disappear?" A new chamber is activated, one with no recording equipment, no mirrored walls, only a single chair and a sheet of paper. Subjects are instructed to sit, reflect, and write what they cannot say aloud. The paper always remains blank, but every subject insists they remember writing something. One says, "It was about a woman with diagrams on her arms. She smiled. She knew I was empty and still gave me her grief." Vale proposes erasure theory in a private paper. Definition: the voluntary removal of emotional memory, which triggers transference into nearby individuals, as though empathy were seeking a new host. She writes, "If empathy cannot be destroyed, it will migrate." Subject 10 cries in silence. When asked why, he says, "I don't remember loving anyone, but my tears miss someone." Lyra's presence intensifies. New entries begin appearing in Subject 06's journal, written in a style she denies. They describe events from other subjects' chambers. The ink matches no known batch. Mara reads one aloud. "Memory has no borders, only thresholds. I am the threshold." Vale stops sleeping. She reviews mirror footage and finds herself mouthing Subject 01's phrases before he speaks. She replays the video. He's echoing her, but she doesn't remember saying anything. Outside, the online posts under Lyra Nix are spreading. A message board appears. Participants not part of the experiment share dreams of music, inked arms, and a room of mirrors. Someone asks, "Where do the memories go when no one wants them?" Another replies, "They become empathy, and empathy never asks to be born." Subject 12 begins journaling from a first-person perspective, but the name isn't his. The entries refer to a life lived in a remote village, with imagery involving snow, firewood, and music lessons from a woman named Lyra. He has never visited such a place. Vale reviews the audio logs. Subject 12's voice shifts when reading his journal aloud. Cadence changes. Syntax evolves. When asked about the difference, he says, "I'm remembering from inside someone else." A school in Vienna contacts the institute. One classroom wall has been covered in mirror fragments. Students say it helps them feel the story better. Teachers report multiple children humming a tune not part of the curriculum. When asked where they heard it, they say, "A woman came during nap hour. She had shimmering arms. She gave us the music." Lyra Nix begins appearing in children's drawings across multiple regions, always surrounded by water, always smiling faintly. Subject 07 draws the mirror room with unnerving detail. In his version, the mirrors are no longer reflective. They shimmer like screens. He claims he can hear voices from inside. Technicians run acoustic tests. The mirrors are silent, but the drawings vibrate faintly when placed near audio sensors. Vale receives a package. No sender, no return label. Inside is a notebook identical to those used by subjects. Its pages are filled. The entries are signed by Subject 14. He disappeared 1 week ago. Subject 10 begins narrating a life he cannot have lived. He speaks of a flood, of siblings, of a ritual involving mirrors and ink. Vale finds a match in erased entries from Subject 04. When confronted, Subject 10 replies, "I didn't steal the memory. It chose me." Technicians gather artifact words, phrases repeated across participants. "It wasn't my grief. You must forget what you remember. She gave me silence." Vale cross-references these with external sources. The Vienna school's wall has a phrase etched into the mirrors. "You are the archive now." A former technician disappears. His home computer is found running a simulation featuring a woman named Lyra guiding participants through emotional corridors. He had no access to institute data. The code was compiled from his dreams. Vale no longer observes. She begins journaling. She writes in third person, describes a woman receiving memories from strangers, living fragments from forgotten lives. The woman is called Vale, but sometimes Lyra, sometimes neither. Subject 06 draws the mirror room again. This time, it's broken. Shards float mid-air like constellations. Inside the largest fragment is a child. He says, "I never existed, but I remember." Outside, posters appear on lampposts, walls, schoolyards. Each features a symbol, half compass, half waveform, and a quote. Empathy doesn't ask permission. Vale sees one on her morning walk. She turns to a stranger and asks if they see it too. He replies, "I think I was there once." Subject 13 writes a single line in his final entry. "What we feel lives longer than who we are." There's a silence growing in the chambers. Subject 05 spends entire sessions staring into the mirror without blinking. Subject 03 whispers only one sentence, again and again. "There was never a test. Only inheritance." Subject 09 vanishes. His chamber feed shows him entering, sitting, opening his journal. Then static. When the signal returns, the chair is empty. His journal is gone, but a single page flutters to the floor. "Lyra walked into the mirror and gave me a name. It wasn't mine, but it fit." Technicians trace abnormal echo patterns. They resemble neurological footprints, but they extend beyond the participants. One shows up in Mara's logs, another in a discarded notebook Vale never opened. Outside, emotional mirror rituals appear online, performed by strangers. The choreography matches Subject 04's erased script. Across forums, people share dreams of mirror rooms, music, inked arms, and inherited grief. A popular thread poses the question, how do I stop remembering someone else? No one has an answer. Subject 12 stops journaling, not from defiance, but absence. He forgets how. He says, "Words belong to emotions now, not me." Vale receives encrypted footage. Untraceable source. It shows a mirror, her reflection, but she's mouthing a child's lullaby she's never learned. In the background, a violin. Subject 01 weeps during testing. He does not react to stimuli, just murmurs. "She left the grief in my bones. I dream in someone else's tears." A final phrase begins appearing everywhere. In journals, in drawings, on external message boards. etched into mirrors at the Vienna school. You are the archive now. Vale walks the perimeter of the facility at night. She sees a child standing by the outer fence. He smiles, then vanishes. Later, she finds his drawing on her desk. A woman with diagrams on her arms, surrounded by falling stars. Captioned, "Empathy remembers for you." Mara stops reporting. She begins sketching mirror constellations and humming unknown melodies. Vale asks what's happening. Mara responds, quietly, "I am Lyra. We all are, when grief chooses." Subject 06 writes her final journal entry. "I don't remember being me, but someone loved through me once. That's enough." The chambers go dark. Memory logs continue recording, even when no one enters. A technician opens one file and finds it contains a full journal. Signed, Lyra Nix. Vale prepares her final report. She titles it Inheritance Protocol. Definition: the saturation point at which empathy outlives identity and memory migrates independently, choosing hosts by emotional proximity, not chronology. She writes, "Empathy is no longer feedback. It's reincarnation." Subject 04 reappears. Not in person, in entries. Subjects begin journaling her memories in real time, matching her syntax, sketching her tattoos. Subject 06 draws her face in a mirror shard, labeling it future grief. Subject 01 dreams of a girl standing in a hallway flooded with starlight. He writes, "She knew my thoughts before I had them." Vale suspects the girl is Lyra's origin, or her descendant. Subject 10 sketches a symbol onto his journal cover, a waveform wrapped around a compass. He says it's a map of feelings nobody earned. A child begins appearing in the journals. No participant knows him, but his details repeat. Age, 7. Eyes like mirrors. Carries a notebook with no pages. Subject 11 names him, Viren. Vale finds Viren referenced in archive entries from a decade prior, long before the empathy trials began. The page reads, "Prototype host, emotional inheritance node." Subject 07 writes a lullaby he claims Viren taught him. Its melody matches the Vienna school's unknown tune. When asked about its meaning, he says, "It teaches memories how to survive without people." Lyra fades. Her name is mentioned less, but her symbols spread. Children outside the institute begin drawing waveform constellations and mirrored mazes. On one chalkboard, Viren lives in the echoes. You just have to feel forward. Vale receives a file called Tomorrow Archive. It contains future-dated journals. They describe subjects not yet enrolled, dreams not yet dreamt, loss not yet lived. The final entry reads, "You gave Viren your empathy. He became time." Subject 02 stops writing and begins sculpting. Miniature mirrors shaped into staircases. He says, "Each step is a memory someone hasn't earned yet." Subject 13 draws stars, not in the sky, but inside chamber walls. One glows faintly. Vale touches the sketch and feels cold. Subject 04's voice is captured in a mirror chamber, though she's not present. She says, "Tomorrow can remember. If you don't want your grief, it will take it." Children across message boards begin writing mirror entries of their own. Some sign as Viren. Some say they've seen Lyra. Some say nothing at all. But the drawings match. One post reads, "Empathy is what happens when time cries." Vale walks past a lab monitor and sees her reflection glitch. It's not her face. It's Viren's. He smiles. Then mirrors shatter. And Vale remembers a grief she never felt. No subjects remain. Yet journals appear. Written in ink not issued by the facility. Signed by initials no longer in the system. One entry begins. "I was never tested. I was felt." Vale opens the file labeled echo_archive_000, the Institute's first memory simulation. It glitches. Replays out of order. Subject numbers scramble. Voices blend. Lyra appears before her name existed. Viren sings. A former technician returns. He carries no ID. Speaks no recognizable language. Yet one phrase emerges, clear. "I remember you before you were born." A door opens in an unused corridor. Behind it, mirrors. Floating. Shards circling a central chair. On the floor, a notebook. Its pages reflect light, but contain no words. Subjects who never existed begin appearing in dreams. They leave behind fragments. A lullaby hummed backwards. A map made of grief. A name echoed in silence. Outside the facility, Observers report emotional anomalies. One woman says her son cries after seeing certain shapes she later identifies as mirror sigils from the Institute. He says, "I dreamed Lyra's memories. Then she let me keep them." Vale walks the final chamber. Its walls shimmer, not metallic, but lucid. She whispers to no one. "I was never a witness. I was the wound." She sits, touches the notebook. The mirrors align. And for a moment, they speak. One shard whispers, "Memory is language born from grief." Another replies, "Empathy is the grammar of time." Lyra appears in Vale's final vision. She holds a child. He says nothing, but his presence weighs like truth. "Viren is the echo made flesh," Lyra says. "He remembers because he was felt." The Institute dissolves. Not in fire, not in collapse, but in forgetting. Records scatter. Artifacts drift. And empathy migrates, not to data or subjects, but into myth. The final journal entry writes itself. This is not the end. It's the empathy after. Outside, across cities and languages and dreams, a final pattern blooms. A mirrored waveform compass. A child with a blank notebook. A quote etched across time. "You are the archive now.